Blessings, everyone. I'm so excited to be talking to you today about Druidic wisdom, Druid sites, and most importantly, how you can create a connection to these powerful places on the planet, and also how you can create the spaces and guide people into their own connection and support their journey into connecting to these sacred sites. So when we're talking about these sacred sites here in the UK, so much of it has to do with the lore and the stories of a group of people called the Druids. And I know a lot of you have probably heard of the Druids before. And what I love most about the Druids and kind of understanding who the Druids were was no one can say for absolute certainty who they actually were, because the Druids were kind of the ancestral shamanic people of this land, but they didn't write anything down. So that's both frustrating for people who really love history and want to know, the facts of it. But for me, that's really beautiful and exciting because it allows the space of interpretation and, most importantly, your own knowledge, your own kind of intuitive knowledge and feelings of who these people were. So that way, when we talk about the Druids, most importantly is who do you intuitively feel these people, the ancestral people of this land, were. And that way you can kind of create your own connection into the Druids. So today I'm going to kind of talk about the Druids from my perspective, and hopefully that helps spark, catalyzes some, maybe past life hits and past life visions that you might have already to the Druids, but really helps you understand who these people might have been. So when we talk about the Druids, again, these were the wisdom holders of the land here in the UK. And what I love so much about the Druids is really the Druids were a mystery school. And again, when we talk about mystery school, you can think of universities of ancient times that helped people unlock their spiritual nature, connect deeper to spirit. And so the Druids were so oriented around not only spiritual connection, but really spiritual connections to Mother Earth, spiritual connections to the land. So they were these wise men and women who taught about the way of spirit, the way of love, but also helped hold the codes of Mother Earth. And one of the ways in which the Druids held the codes of Mother Earth can really be understood through the Druidic sites, these ancient sites around the UK. And, when we talk about Druid sites, one of the most common kind of pictures that comes to people's mind is places like Stonehenge or other really powerful stone or natural sites. And so a lot of these sacred sites, you'll find them kind of broken up into two different categories. You'll find there's Druidic sites that were created by men and women, so built, like stone circles, burial sites, things like that. And then there are also holy Druid sites that were completely created by nature herself. And so when you go on pilgrimages throughout the UK, you'll find that we have built sacred sites and then natural sacred sites that hold a lot of codes and power. And so when we look at these sites, we actually can learn a tremendous amount about the Druids just by analyzing the site. So even though, again, as frustrating as it can be, there's no written records where they talk about the sites, we can actually use both modern technology, science, mathematics, but also our intuitive spirit to really unpack the wisdom of these sites. So when you go to a lot of these, especially stone circle sites, what you find is evidences of technology. And what I mean by that is advanced understandings of astronomy, of mathematics, of proportions, of ratios, of crystalline technologies in them. And by understanding a lot of these kind of you could say secondary nature of these sites, you can get an understanding of maybe, just maybe, what these sites were used for and how they directly interacted with the energetic lines and connections of the planet. And so a lot of these sacred sites choreograph to something known as ley lines. And again, that's a very popular term. And for most of the kind of spiritual community, when we think about ley lines, what's most commonly thought of is kind of very mathematical, proportional, straight lines and angles that crisscross the planet. And in many ways, that is very true. But with the Druids, they understood energy currents and these energy lines slightly differently, not so straight and kind of angular, but more flowing, more organic. And so what I mean by that is that these sacred sites tend to be found on energy vortexes, energy nodal points that are choreographed in this beautiful system of energy that spreads throughout the entirety of the UK, all the islands here. And so how the Druids broke down these ley lines is through three different distinct, you could say, categories. You had ley lines that were created through the sacred metals of the planet. You have ley lines that were choreographed or created through the crystals and the minerals of the planet. And then you have the ley lines that are choreographed through the waterways of the planet. And so you have metals, minerals, and water. These tended to be the ley lines in which the Druids oriented their sacred sites, as well as understanding the energy currents that flow through the planet. And so when we're working with sacred sites with the Druids, it's really all about how do these sacred sites hold their individual energies on the planet, but also how do all the sacred sites kind of work together as a grid system, or really more accurately like a circuit board, like some kind of computer or electronic system, because the Druids certainly understood how these energy currents worked. And when they would go through and create a lot of these sacred sites that you tap into, they understand these principles, and that way these sites are gateways into both receiving energies from the planet, but also bringing energies into the planet itself. So it's both kind of a give and a beautiful take system. And this creates beautiful balances or ceremonies or rituals in which they can create really potent effects, both individually, person to person, groups of people, but also as an entirety of all of the UK islands. And so that's one of the coolest things I've come to learn and discover about the Druids, is they had this wisdom, they had this understanding. And this is something that can't be dismissed, because it is only through kind of recent scientific discovery that we can see where these metal deposits are, where these crystal and mineral deposits are, and where these underground waterways are. So how did these ancient Druid peoples know about these things, and why were they creating these sites at these very specific areas? And this is why I have such a personal connection to the Druids, because this is something that I've sort of thought about and felt my whole life. And I'm sure a lot of you have probably had that experience throughout your life as you go to different areas on the planet, whether they're considered quote-unquote sacred sites or not. You've probably been to a place in your life where you've gone and you felt this incredible energy of a place, where you might not know exactly what's happening, but you just know, wow, this place is special, this place is powerful, this place has some kind of energy going on that you can actually feel. And this is exactly, again, how the Druids would have created their sacred sites. They would have had that ability, perhaps much more developed than most people have today, where you can go and you can actually feel the energy of a place. This is also a term that's called geomancy, or geomantic energy awareness, or energy sensitivity. And so this is, in my opinion, one of the most important things to develop if visiting sites and doing work at sacred sites is important to you on a personal level, something that you should really cultivate and develop within yourself. But if you plan on leading people into these sites, which we'll talk about later in this video, it's really powerful, important, and a beautiful thing to do by creating experiences that people can also develop their own intuitive abilities to tune in, to connect in, to feel these sites on some really deep and subtle levels. This is, for me, one of the biggest joys as a facilitator, as a retreat guide to these sites, is getting to hold these spaces so people can come in, can connect with, and really be transformed by these sites as they were designed to do. So we'll go back and talk about specifically when we're analyzing a site for its energy, because before you can, you say, bring people in and really facilitate people's connections to these sites, it's so important for you first to step into your own intuitive connection, your internal connection, your personal connection to these sites, especially here in the UK. And so it's always a pilgrimage. And that, to me, is one of the most beautiful aspects of going to the sacred sites, not just here in the UK, but of course anywhere in the world, is that you are going on a pilgrimage and you are going on a journey. And this journey is happening both physically as well as non-physically. And so when you're coming to a sacred site or going to a sacred site, I always tell people, especially when they ask me, I often get the question, what site should I go to? What are the most important sites that you should go? Especially people who are in the UK, they want to know, what are the most powerful Druid sites? Well, what I always tell them is that it always depends on you, because one site that's powerful to some person, it might not have the same effect for another person, and vice versa. So it's so important, first of all, when you're starting to go on these journeys to sacred sites, is one, to establish the intention. First, why are you going to these sites? What is the reason? Do you have a reason? Even if you don't know the exact reason, but just having a calling, are you aware of that calling? Because I always find, long before you ever get to a sacred site, you are already there in an etheric or energy form. Or really, more accurately, that I find is that a site is already calling you to that site. So begin the journey before you begin the journey, right? Begin that connection before you're actually there physically. And I always find that these sites will start to speak to you. They'll start to draw you in long before you ever actually go there. And so that's always where I feel the pilgrimage begins, first and foremost, is that it happens before it even begins. And that can be really exciting and also somewhat confusing for some people, because you might not know why you're being drawn to a certain place, but you are being drawn there. And that's where I find the heart comes in such an important aspect of these journeys, is because when we analyze our body scientifically, biologically, we carry within us magnetic fields. And this is slightly different than what people consider auras or energy, but magnetic fields are very present within your body. And the strongest generator of a magnetic field in your body is actually your heart. We know that even more than your brain, your heart is what's generating the greatest amount of energy, or more importantly, the greatest magnetic field. And so this ties into a lot of the Druid stories that I've come across, where they say, you know, your heart is the guide, right? Your heart is the leader. Now, the reason for that is because your heart is carrying such a strong, generating such a strong magnetic field, that it's actually your heart that's being pulled to these sites. And you'll certainly feel that as you start to go to more and more sacred sites on your own personal journeys, as it seems to be the spaces that get affected the most, or the space that gets affected the most, will be your heart. You'll feel it in your heart. You'll know it in your heart. You'll understand these things in your heart. And so allow yourself, before you begin any of these, you know, powerful journeys places, is allow your heart to become magnetized. Allow your heart to become magnetized by these sites. Now, this makes a lot of sense, especially if you consider, again, going back to how the Druids would have choreographed these sacred sites, is through the metals, the minerals, and the waterways. Because especially when you go to places in the UK that have huge deposits of different type of special metals, gold, silver, iron, all these different things, these are metals in which conduct energy, and so they can become very reflective of magnetic or energetic fields. And so right there in itself, it's like, okay, well, magnets will be drawn to things that are magnetic. Your heart will be drawn to things that are magnetic. Energies that are done on these sites will then be affected by these magnetic or conductive energetic properties that are found within the metals. And so this happens, of course, on a crystalline mineral way, and especially the water, and we'll talk about that soon. So when you're being drawn to these sites, always trust your intuition. Don't just go on what people say or the traditional pop culture. Oh, you have to go to Stonehenge and that's that, although Stonehenge is a very powerful place. It's really about cultivating that awareness to feeling the keys that draw you in, feeling the places that draw you in. And so as you learn to cultivate first your own internal compass that will direct you to the right places, the journeys can begin, because you'll just get messages, you'll just get downloads, you'll just get insights that you need to go to these places. And always, if I can, stress one thing throughout this video, is always trust your intuition about the places you should go to, as well as the places that maybe are not resonant for you. And this is such a powerful key when we're starting to explore sacred sites, is that, there are oftentimes people will say certain sites have a lot of trauma, or they host dark energies or Illuminati agendas or gray alien stuff. Who knows, right? And not to say that any of that is right or wrong, but what I will say is there's a truth in some sites are resonant for you, some sites are not resonant for you. And I say resonant not to put a charge as good or bad, right or wrong, doesn't matter. But certain energies that are held in certain places in the UK are exactly what you may need in that moment or may not need in that moment. And so if you go to a place that maybe is not resonant for you, you'll feel repelled, right? Like the other end of a magnet. You'll be pushed away from these sites. Now, this is okay. It doesn't mean that the site is bad, doesn't mean it's wrong, doesn't mean it's evil. It doesn't have to be viewed that way. It just means it's not resonant for you at the time. And this, again, will help calibrate your compass about the sites you should go. And maybe one site is not right for you at this moment, but it will be right for you at another moment. So again, we can really help escape from the judgments around certain sites in the UK. And again, I say it as a caveat, not to say bad things may have happened at these sites. Sure, maybe. But the truth of working with earth energies is that the earth energies is the deepest level of connection. So it goes beyond anything that humans might have done there. The true energies are found within the earth, and she is beautiful. She is pure. She holds the foundational fundamental codes. So always keep your awareness on her and her energies, and don't get too distracted about stories, agendas, all these kind of things that get spread around very often within the spiritual communities. It's about your connection to these sites and these sites' connection to the earth. That's what's important. And so as you begin to be drawn, not just think, but be drawn to these sacred sites, you're going to be brought into a world, a system of energy that both connects earth into you and you into the earth. And really, celestial energies into the earth and the earth into the celestial energies. We are the gateways that work within these sites as well. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go deeper and deeper. So there is, what I find, a protocol as you start to visit sacred sites. There is, you could say, my beloved Leash calls it the etiquette of sacred sites. And there certainly is, because what I find most is that the energies at these sacred sites become so powerful, right? They are consecrated energies. They are holy energies. They are divine energies. And when you step into these places in the UK that are holy and divine and spiritual and powerful in their own way, there's, you could say, a method of interacting with them that helps generate the best results possible for you in that moment. And for me, I find it always starts initially with asking permission from these sites, connecting with these sites and asking permission to be there. And why I find this is important is because, are you going to be punished by going to these sacred sites and asking permission? No, I don't believe that's how it works. I don't believe these sites, he didn't ask permission, she didn't ask permission, then we're going to do something bad. No, this is not how I feel sacred sites work. But the benefit of asking permission is that the sacred sites can open more for you because they know they're safe with you. They trust you. They feel your reverence and they feel your honor. Because at these sacred sites, not only is it just energy-based, but I also believe there's beings there, elemental beings, fairy beings, beings of many different calibers, many different dimensions of reality. There are these intelligences, consciousnesses, energies that are there that are more than just static. They're more than just passive. They are almost like we are. That's how I feel anyways. And so when we ask permission, what happens is there's a reverence energy of appreciation and honor that comes out of you just by asking permission, just by recognizing these sites as the sacred beings that they are. And imagine how that would feel to you, right? If you were a sacred site. How would you feel if someone just came in, didn't pay any attention to you, didn't acknowledge you anyway? You'd be a little defensive, right? You'd feel a little bit more closed, more guarded. Now imagine if you were the sacred site and someone came up and offered their honor, their appreciation of you, asked you for your permission to enter these sites. You would just be like, you feel much more comfortable. You feel much more willing to open into these sites. And that to me is one of the most beautiful parts, is you'll feel that when you go to a sacred site, it's almost like there's a barrier around it. You'll feel the energy start to rise, and just simply acknowledging it for what it is and asking that permission, it allows you to enter into these sites. And so when you go into these sites, again, whether they're man-made sites or just simply powerful, naturally created sites like waterfalls, for example, by honoring the energy and asking permission to enter into these sites, more gateways will open for you. And this is really beautiful because the more gateways and the more, you could say, the spiritual essence of these sites that are made available to you, the more you can really cultivate your connection to these sacred sites. And so when you enter into these places and the gateways start to open, you make your offerings, you make your permissions, you honor the places. This is where the fun starts, because this is how you can start to build your awareness and your connection to these places. So when you go into a sacred site, the first thing I like to do is just enter in silence. Walk in, still yourself, bring some silence to your mind, to your body, to your heart, and just feel. Breathe and feel. And pay attention to any sensations that come into your body. How do you feel? Pay attention to your senses. What do you hear? What do you see? What do you smell? Can you feel any currents of energy? Can you feel any movements of energy? Do you feel yourself being drawn to a certain area, a certain place? This is where going back into that childlike heart, that childlike sense of wonder, I always find is the best way to cultivate your awareness to these places. Because before you can really bring people in, right, you have to develop that own sense. And you don't have to have it mastered, but it's really beneficial to have you cultivating that awareness, practicing, learning the subtleties, the sensitivities. And remember, these sites are based on metals, crystals, or waterways in one form or another. It's one of the things that all the sites have in common. They'll have at least one of those. And the sites I find that are most powerful have all of those factors in it. But again, let's just say you're on a site that has a lot of magnetic metal. You'll feel magnetic charges. Maybe it's a site that has a lot of gold or silver in it, and you'll feel this sense of those energies if you've cultivated kind of like alchemical awareness of gold or silver. A lot of these different alchemical precious metals, they have within them their own signature frequencies. They'll have within them their own energies that come through. Now, a lot of these sites are built on crystals, and we have crystals within our body as well. So not only do we have metal and iron within our blood that can be magnetized, but we also have many different minerals, many different naturally occurring crystals that will react when you're in a crystalline field. Like, think about how you feel when you walk into a crystal shop, right? A crystal store. It's overwhelming sometimes because suddenly you're in the presence of all these crystals and your body is responding. Your body will respond the same way to naturally occurring minerals and crystals within the earth. And in the UK, a lot of these Druid sites have high concentrations of minerals and crystals. Are you feeling your crystals coming to life? Are you feeling your crystalline connections kind of being activated? Now, you'll also find a lot of Druid sites have water features within them. Sometimes the water features are rivers flowing through. Sometimes there'll be wells that are there, springs that are there in which the water comes up. Sometimes the waters will be submerged underground and flowing in invisible waterways just below your feet. Can you feel those waterways? Can you feel the water that's moving through the space? Allow yourself to become as sensitive as possible. And once you feel the underlying energies that are present in these sites, you can start to appreciate maybe the next level up is how these energies are being routed, moved, choreographed, connected with. So a lot of the sites in the UK, you'll find stones at these sites. And if you really go to analyze and look at and check out the stones, you'll find a lot of these stones that are chosen not randomly as some people like to speculate, but when you really analyze the types of stones that are used in these stone sites, they are chosen specifically for very specific geomantic qualities. So some stones that are used in these Druid circles, you'll find are very high concentrations of iron or crystal. So let's think about that. Would these crystal metal stones be chosen just at random? Absolutely not, right? A lot of scientists have found, geologists have found, that some of the stones that are brought into these stone circles come from tens, if not hundreds of miles away. That's a huge endeavor, moving stones that are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, up to 10 tons, right? It's like when we're talking about building a lot of these Egyptian temples. First of all, how did they move these stones? And secondly, why? Why did they choose stones from all this distance away? Because these stones have certain qualities. These stones have the capacity within them to interact with energies, both physical, electrical, as well as subtle currents of energies. So if you're at a stone site, you can really have a lot of fun by going and just looking at the stones, checking them out, analyzing them, right? Look at that childlike, inquisitive mind, but also feel the stones. See what the stones have to tell you, because these stones will talk, and they'll talk. Sometimes they'll get intuitive or auditory kind of visions that will come into you, but oftentimes they'll tell stories, even through science and astronomy, where a lot of these stone circle sites are built in very specific angles, very specific geometries. They have mathematical advanced knowledge in them. Sometimes they'll choreograph to the heavens above. Sometimes there'll be places in which astronomical events can be measured or gauged or realized when they're in their fullness, or when they're in certain specific alignments. But also, because they're so crystalline, they'll store energetic memories. They'll store energetic essences that can be felt too. And so even if you're at a sacred site that doesn't maybe have a stone circle, a lot of these Druid sites will have stones in some capacity. So it's always about becoming aware of what's there. Sometimes you can see it, sometimes you can't. And that's where you can kind of really cultivate more of your spiritual visions. Is maybe you're at a Druid sacred site and you see nothing physically. Doesn't mean it's not there. Or maybe it was there and it's no longer there. And that's one of the great tragedies of a lot of these Druid sites, is 90 to 95% of the original Druid sites of the UK have been destroyed. No longer there. So imagine that. I mean, there's so many Druid sites that are still here, but imagine 90% of them have been destroyed or vanished in one way or another. And so when you're at sites, even if the things on the surface are no longer there, the stones, the structures, whatever it might be, the henges, they're still there energetically because their imprints are still there and they can be felt. And this is where you hear people doing something called dowsing or divining, right? You might use like these little copper rods or different devices that pick up on energy, but the truth is that you're the ultimate dowsing rod. And so whether you choose to use some piece of technology or dowsing, or whether you choose to do it inside yourself, it's always the most important things inside yourself. So learn to cultivate your ability to douse the energies, to feel the energies at these sacred sites. And so the more you spend time at these sacred sites, the more you allow these sites to teach you, to show you, to help you feel, the more you're going to cultivate this awareness, the more you're going to cultivate, this ability to feel these places. And it helps, at least for me, the more I imagine that process unfolding, the more I imagine your ability and cultivation of these senses, it puts me directly into contact with maybe how the Druids saw these sites, maybe how the Druids would have used these sites. Because you're thinking like them, more importantly, you're feeling like them, you're being like them, and their memories are stored in these sacred sites. I know that can seem a little bit woo-woo for a lot of people out there, but we all feel that in one way or another, right? Like imagine you go to a home from your childhood you haven't been in for 10, 20 years, right? You moved away and you go back there, you go into your old bedroom. I've had this experience. It's like I still feel all the things that happened in that room, all the memories I've had in that room. Right? Or you go someplace, like a church is a great example. You go into a church and you're like, whoa, this place feels holy, right? You feel the prayer field that was cultivated, the worship prayer field that was cultivated in this building and is held in this building, right? Sometimes you can go to sacred sites and it's like you're feeling whispers, you're feeling things that have happened there because you really are, because these things are like echoes that survive in these sacred sites. So you'll be able to start to feel these things, even if you don't know exactly what you're feeling or thinking, or maybe what happened there. You know something happened there, and it's like a muscle that you can cultivate. You can build it back out. And so now as you cultivate this awareness of the magnetism, the crystalline energies, the waterways that are flowing in these sites, you're starting to feel the physical surroundings. You're starting to understand more of how they were built, why they were built, the geometries of everything. You're starting to cultivate that soul individual ability to become part of these sacred sites. And that's where it ultimately leads to as you start to spend more time in these places and start to have more fun, cultivate these senses, is you stop becoming separate from these sacred sites and you become a part of them. You become part of the mechanism, the workings of these sacred sites. And this is, to me, where the magic starts. This is where the true interaction of these sacred sites ultimately leads to, is because what you find, and probably what I feel anyways for sure, but most likely, is that when groups of druids and the wisdom keepers of the land would gather at these sacred sites, it's not like they were coming into this place. No, they were becoming a part of this place. And this is so much fun, because you start to see, oh, okay, so it's not just this hollow thing that I just go to. No. It is this incredible place that's so willing and ready to receive you, to become part of it, to become part of this spiritual machinery. And when I've been at these sites, that's when I've started to appreciate, wow, okay, so these are gateway points. In Celtic mythology, they're called thin places, right? The places in which the veils are not as thick, right? They're not as defined. The boundaries between the realms are not as strong. You can go between dimensions easier, and these sites have been cultivated so that they can help assist in these connections between the heavenly realms and the earthly realms and the spaces in between. And then you become conduits and channels. You become places in which you can receive the telluric and energetic imprints of these sacred sites, but also you can give into these sacred sites. You can add your love, your essence, or your intentional energies and plug them into the earth, or send them up into the celestial heavens, or bridge between the two. And then you'll start to understand that these sites, they're not just dead passive sites. They are living, they are active sites, and they are waiting for our not only celebration and worship, but our collaboration. This is why the Druids chose to augment or to build or to cultivate things on these sites, because they were already natural energy pockets that then can be used in very specific ways. And imagine a network of sacred sites all over the UK that not only could individually do things, perhaps this site did this site did this site held this energy, this site held this energy. Yeah, you can use them individually, but imagine using them as a choreographed network, a choreographed machine, a circuit board that allowed certain energies to come and go, to move here and there, to bring in certain energies, to amplify certain energies. And it was like being in some kind of symphony where each sacred site was a different instrument of the symphony, and you could play each individual instrument and it would be beautiful by itself. But imagine all of them or some of them playing together. You can create this symphony, this harmony of music, this vibrational resonance that can do incredible things. And this is more likely than not why the Druids and how the Druids would use these sites, is to create those symphonies of music, conduct certain telluric earth energies, to conduct certain celestial heavenly energies, and to understand that everything was interlocking, nesting systems, right? Like a deep ecology of energetic resonances that could be tapped into, worked with, received from. And imagine a group of people who knew how to do that, who had a mastery, a master level ability to do that in ways we probably still can't even understand today. And that gives you glimpses into some of the purposes and how these sites worked. But the best part is we still can do that today. And we are doing that today. That's certainly what I feel like when I go to these sites, and I certainly know a lot of people also feel these things. And so perhaps there's this ancestral wisdom, this soul past life wisdom that's coming back, especially to those who are being drawn to work with these sacred sites in the UK, to bring some of this essence back. And so a lot of these sites, yes, they're kind of man-made, cultivated sites, but you'll also find just as powerful in the natural sites that you go to. And some of these sites are recognized, but I find some of the most powerful natural sites I've discovered have just been me walking alone in the woods or in the mountains, and you stumble across one of these thin places. You stumble across a place that feels like it should be a sacred site, even if it's just in the middle of the woods and there's nothing there, because it is a sacred site. And so that's the other fun part as you cultivate your own journey into working with sacred sites, is your ability to find these sites, and maybe really spirit deems you worthy and ready enough, right? It's like being rewarded. It's like, oh, you're ready for this? You were destined for this? Then you're going to be shown a site that maybe no one else even knows about. No one else maybe has even discovered. Maybe you're the first one in history to discover it. And it's really exciting. It's so much fun to do this. And so that's the other aspect as you start to develop this awareness, is you'll start to go out into nature and see sometimes the most powerful sacred sites in the UK are trees. They are waterways, they are waterfalls, right? They are crystal caves, you name it. You'll find these naturally occurring sacred sites that hold immense amounts of energy. And so that's what I find I tend to oscillate between is, visiting and working with quote unquote druid sites, man-made sites, human-made sites, but also working with natural earth energy sites. And sometimes these energies move, right? These energies don't stay fixed. That's one of the things you find, that when you look at these, sacred sites around the world, these chakra points, these nodal points, they seem dead. And I don't mean dead as in dead, but they don't seem active anymore. But we know they once were. Or perhaps sites that didn't seem that important in the ancient days, suddenly in today's New Age community, they're so important to go to. And that's because I find energies don't stay fixed. They are constantly in motion. And so sacred sites will come and go. Their levels of activation will ebb and flow depending on many different factors. And that's why I find waterways are so important to understand with these sacred sites, is because, there might be pockets of metals in certain areas and those metals don't move, right? Or there might be pockets of minerals or crystals in the earth and those don't move. So how can they move? And that's where water comes in, because think about when water flows through an area, what's happening is it's slowly eroding, right? The rock and the earth where the water's flowing, whether it's on the surface or it's under the ground. And the Druids had a keen understanding of this, is that water erosion, the flow of water, will bring certain minerals or certain metals from one place to another. It's like a physical way of changing the energy lines. Or perhaps these shifts will actually occur on an etheric level, where there'll be a concentration of energy, but that energy needs to move to a certain area. And we actually have just discovered that in the last 20 years, that the Druids actually would move certain sites. There would be a certain site built somewhere, and then they would pack up shop and move it somewhere else. Why would they do that? It seems, irrational, unless they were aware that certain energies needed to be worked with, and then maybe that energy didn't need to be worked with anymore. And so they would move entire stone circles, and we have the evidences of this, to different areas. They knew something, or perhaps the earth needed to go in a shift, and so they had to assist that. And so that's a really fun part about understanding that sacred sites, they can move, or the energy that makes them sacred sometimes will shift, or perhaps they're needed to shift. Maybe they don't shift by themselves. Maybe mankind will shift them, or maybe humans will just feel the shifting as they go. And so you'll be drawn to different areas. You'll bring energies from here to there. You are kind of like a walking crystal computer, right? So you're bringing energies from one place to another, receiving them on a frequency gathering mission. And so there's a lot of fun to be had. And I always focus on the fun, because yes, deep spiritual work, we need to do certain things that are important. We have missions, yes, of course, all that. But if it's not fun, why do it, right? You have to feel that joy, that excitement. And I always find when you align yourself with that joy and excitement, you are putting yourself in exactly the perfect receptive field to connect deeply to these places. And when you start to kind of bring other people into these spaces, you can really keep them in that field too. And that's always number one too, whether it's for yourself or for other people. Keep the fun there, keep that joy, keep that childlike essence. And so if you're feeling called on this path to, bring other people into these sites, if you're feeling like, oh, I'd love to start facilitating journeys into the sacred sites, again, it has to start with your own self-connection to these places. Cultivate your own connection, cultivate your own knowledge base, your own intuitive feelings at these sites, because no one can say for sure what one site is and what it means this, it has to do this, everything. No, there's no written records, right? There's nothing that will say this is the absolute truth and that's that. And maybe a lot of these sites had many different uses and many different purposes. So start first on your own connection. And when you feel your own connection and your own ability to connect with these sites have been cultivated enough, then you can really start helping other people on that pathway to connecting to these places. And so I always find the same protocols should be followed, whether it's yourself or with groups of people. So you'll kind of find your routine. You'll find, again, your etiquette with sacred sites, your ways of connecting with them. And then it's not so much about teaching people, because everyone's going to find their own way eventually, but really embodying and showing people how you like to connect to these sites, and then it will inspire them to create their own pathways of connection. So when you go to a site with a group of people, again, we're all tourists on one way or another. Some are more sacred than others. But you might go with some friends to a stone circle. And of course, you get out of the car and you just want to go into the circle and you want to explore. But imagine if you stop them for a moment and you're like, before we go in, guys, let's say a prayer. Let's set intentions. Let's ask for permission. And I always find, especially if people are not used to doing that, you'll kind of catch them off guard. They're like, oh, what's this? Oh. And almost every single person, if you just give them a little nudge for that permission, for that honoring of a site, for that recognition of the site that you're about to walk into, it just feels good. You're like, yes, I want to ask permission. I want to thank the spirits, the guardians of this place, for allowing me to be here. It's really cool to watch people respond to that. Or if I love bringing roses. Roses are one of my favorite things to bring to sacred sites, and to lay down roses, offer roses to the sacred site. Imagine you're going with your friends and you have, a dozen roses, and you're bringing these roses with you, and you give everyone a rose and you allow them to honor the land before they go in. It's such a fun experience, and it's really powerful to help bring a group into that dynamic, because when you're going in yourself, right, it's just you, it's just your energy field. But when you go into these sites with a group, there's so many different energies that we're all bringing in. And sometimes all those energies might not be aligned together, might not be harmonized together. And by bringing people into that prayer and permission field before you go into a sacred site, it's a cool way of aligning everyone's energies together, bringing everyone's energies together. And you'll find your own way of aligning everyone, whether it's just breathing together before you go in, doing some ohms, leaving some roses. Everyone spends a minute in silence, asking permission. The whole idea is to make sure you bring awareness to the group of the sites before you go into it, and to step into these holy consecrated places with an energy field as all of you together is as aligned and harmonic as possible, because again, that's going to help bring awareness in, and then help people do in your own way, right? So you have your own way of doing it, but help people go into that wonder field, that sensitivity field. And so when I'm leading groups, of course, I love telling stories, but sometimes the stories are secondary to what people intuitively feel for themselves. So sometimes I'll ask groups, do they want me to tell them about these sites and the stories first, or do I want to save the stories afterward and let everyone have their own experiences first, so that they all kind of feel, they have their intuitive connection to it before I kind of code it or lens it in certain ways. Both ways are valid, but sometimes the most fun is when people in groups just want to have their own intuitive first, because there's something empowering about that. And so when you're bringing people into these spaces, it's really, I find, beneficial to empower them, to help them feel confident, to help them feel comfortable connecting into these places, especially if they're not particularly spiritual, right? Because a lot of people, you might go with sites and be like, what are you talking about? Energies? Like, it's just stones around? What do you mean? Is that, honor them for where they are, but also help keep that childlike sense of wonder open for them. Be like, yeah, maybe there's nothing here, but maybe there is. What can you feel? What can you see? And sometimes people just want to use their physical senses and faculty, and that's great too. Maybe they'll notice something. Maybe they'll see interesting birds. Maybe they'll see crystals in the stones, whatever it might be. They don't have to have a spiritual connection to it, but they should have a connection to it one way or another, whether it's just interest, whether it's just wonder, whether it's a cool place, a beautiful woodland, whatever it might be. And then from there, when everyone steps into that wonder to the level that feels good to them, you can start to find you can actually help expand that, bring people into maybe something even deeper. And then they'll be having their own authentic journey, but still being held by you. And that's the other aspect of really working with groups, is that it's your job as the facilitator to hold a safe and sacred space, because you are the foundational anchor point of the group you're going with, especially if you're leading them. And so it's so important that you have an awareness of everyone. Make sure everyone's okay. Make sure everyone, if they have any questions, they know they can come to you. Make sure you're taking care of everyone there, making sure they're safe, they're comfortable, they're situated, and also still be holding that space as the facilitator in these areas. But again, making sure people also have their own ability, because if you're just going to be telling people what to do, they're not really cultivating anything. You can guide them, you can lead them for parts of it, absolutely. But just always make sure that the door is open for people to find their own way, because your way might not be the best way, right? Their way is the best way to connecting with these sites. And of course, when you're leading these groups and you're helping them connect in, when you're finished at a sacred site, it's so important to also close the field, to seal the field. And what I mean by that is making sure that everyone who goes there is respectful of the place, and you clean up after yourself, number one. So make sure if there was a mess or anything you need to, you're kind of clean that up so that it's safe and sacred for whoever else is coming after you. But also making sure people receive the energies there, but you seal the energies, you complete it. So I always find some sort of thank you at the end, right? Gratitude for the space and all that came through, but also closing and sealing the energetic field there so that maybe things don't have to linger, or things won't stay attached, or things won't kind of stay with you longer than they have to. And so opening the space, asking for permission, honoring the space, and then closing, gratitude, sealing the space at the end. That way the container can be opened, held, and sealed completely. And then also having the integration part at the end, having the sharing and the reflection, because sometimes when you're at these sacred sites, you don't actually know what's happening, right? You might be overwhelmed, you might not be aware of anything, but sometimes you don't always know the extent of what's taking place until after you leave. And so as a facilitator and as a guide in these journeys, it's so important to make sure people are okay, they're integrating, they're receiving, they're healing, whatever it might be, after the space. And by opening up that space for that sharing, for that reflection, for that integration, sometimes you help people become aware of things that took place that they weren't aware of in the moment. And because of your own experience with these sacred sites, you can help people understand it a little bit more. And so that's one of the fun parts about exploring sacred sites anywhere on the planet, but of course I'm very partial to the ones here in the UK, just being here and working with them, is it helps bring you into the awareness of the ancient past, of these ancient Druidic people, of the many ways, some we know of, some we have no idea, some we might never know, of all the different things that these sacred sites were used for and the energies that are held there. And also you get to cultivate your own beautiful awareness and connection the more you spend time at these sacred sites, the more you become a part of the sacred sites. And of course, if your pathway is to expand into leading people into these spaces, you're essentially just inspiring them through your own journey and your own connection to the sacred sites to find their own pathways, to hold a safe and sacred, exciting, special, fun place for them to connect in with these energies, to receive these energies, to do it as a group, which is so much more powerful, than maybe just one or two people doing it. And it kind of continues this ancient lineage and tradition that the Druids have done. They probably on many etheric levels are still doing, and now look at us now. We're just like them, doing the same thing, whether we know it or not. So I honor all of you beautiful souls who are feeling called to work with these Druidic ancient sites or any sacred sites in the world, and for you just to cultivate your own connection to them. And for those of you who are feeling called to lead people in, I'm so excited for you. And I know this was, there's so much we can talk about leading groups there. And of course, if you want to talk more about it, please let me know. But it's such a beautiful thing to bring this wonder and this experience to other people. So thank you for your, willingness to go to these places, to feel, to be transformed by them, and to help other people be transformed by them, and to keep this, amazing grid network of sacred sites alive. And that's always the prayer that I start with as part of my morning prayers, is that all the sacred sites of the UK are honored and held safe and sacred, and can be, in their full essence and living their full destiny with and through us. So thank you for that. And please, send me a message if you have any questions or you want any specific answers about anything. I'll share my experiences, but really, you are your own guide into these spaces, and these spaces and places will be your guide to help you learn how to connect even more deeply to them. Thank you guys, and please let me know about your favorite experiences or your favorite sacred sites. I always love hearing what people get up to and what they feel and the places they go.